There's a pill that has been with us for over a century, a pill that was developed with the best of intentions, a pill that saved lives in wartime, a pill that was handed out like candy in peacetime, a pill that seemed like a miracle drug, and a pill that ultimately became one of the most destructive substances ever created. This is the story of methamphetamine. From its origins in a Japanese laboratory in 1893, to its weaponization by Nazi Germany, to its journey into the American heartland where it would destroy communities and shatter lives. This is the story of how a drug designed to make soldiers superhuman became the plague of the modern age. But before we can understand methamphetamine, we need to understand where it came from. We need to go back to 1887. Berlin, Germany. A Romanian chemist named Lazar Edeleanu synthesizes something new, something that will change the world. He creates amphetamine, phenylisopropylamine, a stimulant, an upper, a drug that makes you feel awake, alert, alive. Edeleanu publishes his findings, but at the time nobody really cares. It's just another chemical, one among thousands being created in laboratories across Europe. It sits in the scientific literature for decades, more or less forgotten. Then, around the same time, in Japan, another chemist named Nagai Nagayoshi is studying the ephedra plant. He isolates something called ephedrine, which is a natural stimulant, and he develops a method for synthesizing it chemically. And in 1893, Nagayoshi takes ephedrine and converts it into something more powerful, something more efficient. He creates methamphetamine. Again, it's just a chemical discovery. Nobody really knows what to do with it. The world isn't ready for it. Nobody's marketing it. Nobody's making it commercially. It just sits in the scientific literature. But then time moves forward. We get to the 1930s. A new decade, a new world. Germany is recovering from the devastation of World War I. The nation has been humiliated. The economy is broken. But there's this emerging pharmaceutical industry. German chemists working on all kinds of drugs. German corporations making medicines. And in 1937, in Berlin, chemists at the Temmler Pharmaceutical Company develop a new, easier way to manufacture methamphetamine. They don't invent it that was done decades before. But they figure out how to make it cheaply and efficiently. They patent their process. And they decide to put it on the market. In 1938, Temmler releases methamphetamine commercially under the brand name Pervitin. It's marketed as a wonder drug, a miracle product. You can get it at any pharmacy. No prescription needed. It's available in pills. It's available in powders. It's even available mixed into chocolate. Box of chocolate covered in Pervitin, a treat for tired workers. The marketing is brilliant. The company touts Pervitin as an energy booster, perfect for people working night shifts, perfect for students studying, perfect for anyone who feels tired or low. The ads are everywhere. Billboards across Berlin show people smiling, energized, productive. Germany awake, the slogans say, and the German people respond. They buy millions of pills. But why was Pervitin so popular so fast? Because it worked. It really worked. If you took Pervitin, you felt fantastic. Your fatigue disappeared. Your mood lifted. Your energy soared. You felt like you could do anything. Like you could work for hours without rest. Like you could push your body beyond normal limits. And in the context of 1930s Germany, that was exactly what the Nazi regime wanted. Germany was rearming for war. The country needed workers, soldiers, factory workers, people who could work long hours. The ideology of Nazism was all about strength, physical superiority, the perfection of the human form. And here was a pill that seemed to deliver exactly that. A pill that could turn ordinary people into workers who never tired. into soldiers who could fight without limit. So the Nazi government didn't just allow Pervitin, they embraced it, they encouraged it. By the late 1930s, Pervitin was endemic in Germany. It was everywhere. Factory workers took it. Soldiers took it. Hitler himself took it. His personal physician, Theodor Morell, was administering it to him regularly, and the government was using Pervitin strategically. Military leaders saw an opportunity. What if they could give Pervitin to all their soldiers? What if they could create an entire army that didn't need sleep? An army that wouldn't feel fear? An army that would follow orders without question? A Nazi doctor named Otto Friedrich Ranke became obsessed with this idea. Ranke was the director of the Research Institute for Defense Physiology in Berlin. He tested Pervitin on university students. He documented the effects meticulously, and he concluded that Pervitin could give Germany a military advantage, an edge that could help win a war. Ranke wrote enthusiastically about the potential. With Pervitin, he wrote, you can go on working for 36 to 50 hours without feeling any noticeable fatigue. He imagined an army of soldiers on Pervitin, soldiers who could march for days without rest, who could fight continuously, who could push past the normal human limits of endurance. In 1939, Germany invades Poland. This is the first real military test of Pervitin in the field, and the results seem to validate everything the Nazi leadership hoped for. German soldiers, fueled by Pervitin, move incredibly fast. They overwhelm Polish defences. They advance with shocking speed. The Blitzkrieg, the lightning war, seems to work perfectly, and part of that success is chemical, because part of the speed of the Blitzkrieg literally comes from speed. The drug speed. Methamphetamine is moving German soldiers faster, keeping them alert longer, pushing them beyond normal human fatigue. German command makes a decision. Pervitin is going to be standard issue for the Wehrmacht, the German army. Military officials order the manufacture of millions upon millions of pills, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. One source indicates that between April and July of 1940, just a 3-month period, Germany manufactured 35 million tablets of Pervitin for 3 million soldiers. Think about that number. 35 million pills for 3 million soldiers. That's roughly 11 pills per soldier per month, and that's just the official military production. There's also civilian production. There are also black market supplies. There are also supplies in military hospitals. The total amount of methamphetamine being consumed in Nazi Germany is almost incalculable. Soldiers receive Pervitin in their rations, sometimes once a day, sometimes twice a day. Commanding officers are distributing it. Medical officers are handing it out. Tank crews are taking it before combat. Pilots are taking it before missions. It becomes normal. Just part of being a German soldier. The pills have a nickname among the troops. Panzerschokolade, tank chocolate. A darkly humorous name for the little pills that are keeping the army moving. German soldiers marching into France during the spring of 1940 are on Pervitin. German tank crews trapping the British Expeditionary Force at Dunkirk are on Pervitin. German fighter pilots defending German airspace during the Battle of Britain are on Pervitin. The entire military machine is being powered in part by methamphetamine. And the generals are thrilled. The strategy seems to be working. The speed of the German advance is shocking. The efficiency of the military operations is impressive. The willingness of the troops to fight seems unlimited. Everything is going according to plan. But nobody is thinking about the long-term consequences. Nobody is asking what happens when soldiers are taking 10 to 15 milligrams of methamphetamine per day for weeks on end. Nobody is researching the side effects. Nobody is asking about addiction. Nobody is thinking about what comes after the war, because the military doctors of Nazi Germany don't understand addiction the way modern medicine understands it. They see the stimulant effects. They see the increased alertness. They see the reduced fatigue. They don't understand that repeated daily use creates physical dependence. They don't understand that the drug is rewiring the brains of their soldiers. And even as evidence of problems begins to emerge, soldiers becoming erratic, soldiers becoming paranoid, soldiers developing psychotic symptoms, the military continues to distribute Pervitin because they need the soldiers to keep fighting. They need them to keep advancing. The strategic advantage outweighs the health concerns. But the war doesn't end with a German victory. The Allies eventually push back. Germany is pushed back from France. Then Germany is pushed back from Russia. Germany begins to lose. And as Germany begins to lose, the use of Pervitin doesn't decrease. It increases. Desperate military commanders keep distributing Pervitin, trying to maintain morale, trying to push soldiers to fight when everything is hopeless, trying to get more performance from exhausted men who have been fighting for years. By 1945, as Germany collapses, there are reports of German soldiers hopped up on Pervitin, fighting in suicidal last stands, refusing to surrender, unable to comprehend that the war is lost. Some historians have suggested that methamphetamine toxicity contributed to some of the particularly brutal behavior of German soldiers late in the war. The paranoia, the aggression, the inability to think clearly, all possible symptoms of extreme methamphetamine use. And then Germany surrenders. May 1945. The war in Europe is over, and Germany is in total collapse. The government is gone. The military is dissolved. The country is occupied, and the soldiers are going home. Hundreds of thousands of German soldiers, many of them addicted to Pervitin. But it's not just Germany. Japan has been using methamphetamine too. In fact, Japan invented methamphetamine back in 1893. And during the war, Japan has been producing massive quantities under the brand name Philipon. Japanese factory workers took it to work long hours. Japanese soldiers took it for combat. Japanese kamikaze pilots took it before suicide missions. And like Germany, Japan has military stockpiles of the drug. When the war ends in 1945, these stockpiles don't just disappear. They end up on the black market. They end up in the hands of civilians. And Japan experiences something no country has ever experienced before: the world's first methamphetamine epidemic. In the chaos of post-war Japan, methamphetamine becomes available. Cheap. Widely available. And Japanese people, many of them traumatized from the war, addicted to Pervitin from military service, or simply desperate for any escape from the horrors they've experienced, turn to it in massive numbers. By the early 1950s, Japan is in the grip of a methamphetamine crisis. Historians estimate that at the peak of the epidemic, somewhere between 2 and 3 million Japanese people were addicted to methamphetamine. In a nation of around 83 million, that's a staggering rate of addiction. Families are destroyed, violence increases, crime increases, people are behaving erratically, the social fabric is tearing. The Japanese government realizes that this is a crisis, a real threat to the nation. In the mid-1950s, Japan implements a comprehensive anti-drug campaign. New laws are passed. Enforcement becomes strict. Treatment programs are established. And remarkably, by 1957, the epidemic has been largely controlled. Japan manages to suppress the crisis in a way that few nations have been able to do with any drug. It's actually one of the great success stories in drug policy. But at the time, it's viewed as a desperate crisis being addressed by desperate measures. Meanwhile, in the United States, something similar is beginning to happen. American soldiers who've been exposed to methamphetamine during the war come home. And methamphetamine is starting to trickle into American markets. In the 1950s, amphetamines and methamphetamines are being prescribed by American doctors for various reasons. Diet pills, energy boosters, treatments for depression, treatments for narcolepsy. The drugs are legal, they're available by prescription, and doctors are prescribing them liberally. But the FDA isn't regulating them very strictly. And what happens is that methamphetamine and amphetamine begin to appear on the black market. They leak out of legitimate pharmaceutical channels. They become available to people who want them for recreational use. In the 1960s, the availability of methamphetamine in the United States increases dramatically. It becomes popular among college students who want to study all night, truck drivers who want to drive long hours without sleeping, athletes who want to enhance their performance, women who want to lose weight. It's everywhere. And in the 1960s, injectable methamphetamine becomes available. And this is where things start to get really dark, because injectable methamphetamine is much more powerful than pills. It hits the brain faster, it's more addictive, and it creates a different kind of user. A user who is not just taking a pill once a day for energy. A user who is injecting the drug multiple times a day, chasing the high. A subculture emerges. Young people who call themselves speed freaks, who are injecting methamphetamine regularly, who are experiencing the full force of the drug's addictive power, and the effects are visible. These young people are thin, paranoid, malnourished, often violent. The behavior is erratic and bizarre. And it's around this time that motorcycle gangs become involved in methamphetamine production and distribution. Outlaw motorcycle clubs, the Hells Angels, the Mongols, others start manufacturing methamphetamine in hidden labs. They start distributing it. It becomes a major part of their criminal enterprise. The term crank becomes popular. It comes from the fact that motorcycle gangs would hide their methamphetamine in the crankcases of their motorcycles. Hide it in plain sight. Crank, speed, meth. It goes by many names. And in 1970, the federal government finally acts. The Controlled Substances Act is passed. Methamphetamine and amphetamine are classified as Schedule II drugs. They're still available by prescription, but only for specific medical purposes. And they're heavily regulated. The days of liberal prescription are over. But here's the problem. The demand for methamphetamine doesn't disappear. It's still popular. People still want it. So what happens is that motorcycle gangs and other criminal organizations step up production. Illegal production. Manufacturing methamphetamine in secret labs. The recipes for making methamphetamine aren't exactly top secret. A man named Steve Preisler publishes a book in the late 1970s called Secrets of Methamphetamine Manufacture. It details various methods for creating methamphetamine using readily available chemicals. Over-the-counter ingredients, common household materials. Suddenly, anyone with basic chemistry knowledge and access to certain chemicals can make methamphetamine. Illegal labs start popping up, particularly on the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington. The production becomes more and more widespread, and in the 1980s someone develops crystal methamphetamine, a crystallized form. The crystals look like glass shards, like ice, like rock candy, and crystal meth becomes the dominant form on the streets, and it's cheap, incredibly cheap, much cheaper than cocaine, much more affordable for poor and working class people. So meth spreads. It spreads through rural communities, through small towns, through poor urban neighborhoods. It spreads to the southwest, to the Midwest, to the south, to small towns that have never seen hard drugs before, The effects are devastating. Users lose weight rapidly, their teeth decay, their skin ages prematurely. They become paranoid, violent, psychotic, communities are torn apart, families are destroyed, children are neglected, entire towns become hollowed out, and the problem keeps growing as the federal government cracks down on the chemicals used to manufacture meth pseudoephedrine, ephedrine limiting their availability. Mexican drug cartels step in. They start manufacturing meth on an industrial scale, creating enormous quantities in large facilities, much more potent than anything the motorcycle gangs were making. By the 2000s, crystal meth has become a national crisis. It's the drug that rural America is struggling with. Entire communities are being devastated. The health system is overwhelmed. Jails are full of meth addicts and meth manufacturers. The DEA is fighting a losing battle against the wave of meth flooding into the country. In some towns, entire neighborhoods are basically abandoned. Houses are boarded up. Businesses are closed. The only thing thriving is the meth trade. It's like a zombie apocalypse, except the zombies are real people destroyed by a drug. And the effects on individual users are absolutely catastrophic. Methamphetamine attacks the brain in ways that other drugs don't. It creates a dopamine surge that's more powerful than heroin, more powerful than cocaine. The brain becomes rewired. The user develops an intense craving for the drug, an addiction that's almost impossible to break. Meth addicts report that the addiction is harder to overcome than heroin addiction, harder than cocaine. When they try to quit, the withdrawal is severe. Not just physical withdrawal, but psychological withdrawal. Depression that's almost unbearable, anxiety, paranoia, a sense of hopelessness, and the drug causes other problems. Meth mouth a condition where the teeth literally decay and fall out due to the chemical effects of the drug. Formication, the sensation of bugs crawling under the skin, leading users to scratch until they bleed. Sleep deprivation that persists even after the user tries to quit. Paranoid psychosis that can persist for months or years after the user stops using. The drug destroys families. Children are neglected. Abuse is common. Parents choose meth over food for their kids. Babies are born addicted. Kids grow up in homes where the primary focus is obtaining and using methamphetamine. The drug creates criminality. Meth addicts need money for their habit. They shoplift. They steal. They rob. They manufacture and sell meth. The crime rate in towns with meth epidemics is devastated. The drug destroys communities. Entire towns become centres of addiction and crime. Property values collapse. Businesses close. Schools struggle because so many kids are dealing with addiction in their families. Churches struggle. Government services are overwhelmed. And so we arrive at the modern era, where methamphetamine has become one of the most destructive drugs in America, where the consequences of that drug originating in a Japanese lab 130 years ago, being weaponized by Nazi Germany, being spread by American soldiers coming home from war, being embraced by motorcycle gangs, being manufactured in industrial quantities by Mexican cartels, all of that has culminated in a national crisis. The CDC estimates that methamphetamine was involved in nearly 20,000 overdose deaths in 2020, and that number is rising. In some regions of the country, meth is now the leading cause of overdose death, more than opioids, more than heroin, more than fentanyl, just methamphetamine. And it's being combined with other drugs. Meth mixed with fentanyl. Meth mixed with heroin, creating superdrugs that are unpredictable and incredibly dangerous. A single dose can kill. So how did we get here? How did we go from a drug that was supposed to make superhuman soldiers to a drug that's destroying entire communities? Part of it is that we never learned from history. After World War II, the world knew that methamphetamine could be addictive. Japan's epidemic proved it. But instead of treating it seriously, countries moved on. Germany tried to forget. Japan suppressed the memory. The United States watched and then made many of the same mistakes by prescribing it liberally. Part of it is that the addictive properties of methamphetamine were not well understood. Doctors prescribed it for decades without fully understanding what they were creating. Part of it is that once the drug was criminalized, it didn't disappear. It just went underground. And criminal organizations filled the demand. They manufactured it. They distributed it. They made it cheaper and more accessible than ever. And part of it is that methamphetamine is just incredibly effective at hijacking the brain's reward system. It's so powerful, so addictive, that treating addiction is almost impossibly difficult. People relapse. They fail to stay clean. Not because they lack willpower, but because the drug has fundamentally changed their brain chemistry. So the story of methamphetamine is a story about a drug that was created with good intentions, that was used with strategic purpose in wartime, that was misused in peacetime, that was eventually criminalized but never contained. That has now become one of the most destructive substances in human history. From a Japanese lab in 1893 to Nazi battlefields, to American suburbs, to rural towns devastated by addiction. The journey of methamphetamine is a cautionary tale about how a chemical compound, no matter how carefully it's controlled, can eventually escape into the world and cause damage that lasts for generations. And today, as we face an epidemic of methamphetamine use that shows no signs of slowing, we're still grappling with the consequences of decisions made decades ago. Still dealing with the fallout from a drug that was supposed to create superhuman soldiers, but instead created addiction on a scale that we're still struggling to comprehend. The pill that was supposed to make Germany awake ultimately woke up to the terrible truth that some things, once unleashed, can never be controlled. But let me take you deeper into what that destruction actually looks like, because statistics don't capture the human reality of methamphetamine addiction. Let me tell you specific stories. Stories of what happens when this drug enters a community. There's a town I want to tell you about. Let's call it Millbrook. It's a small town in rural America. Population about 8,000. It's the kind of place that's been struggling economically for decades. The factory that used to employ half the town closed in 1995. The railroad stopped coming through in 2001. The main street used to have 30 businesses. Now it has 5. Most of them are empty storefronts with boarded-up windows. In 2010, methamphetamine arrives in Millbrook. Not all at once. Gradually, a dealer here, a cook there, people experimenting, people getting addicted. By 2015, the town is in crisis. The police have started a methamphetamine task force, but the police department is small. Only 15 officers for a town of 8,000. They can't keep up. The number of meth labs they discover is increasing. The amount of meth they're seizing is increasing. But the amount out on the streets is increasing faster. The hospital emergency room is overwhelmed. Overdoses, psychotic breaks, violent episodes, domestic violence, accidents and injuries from meth-fueled recklessness. In 2010, the ER had maybe 1 or 2 meth-related cases per month. In 2015, they're having 1 or 2 per day. The schools are struggling. Teachers notice that more and more kids are coming to school unwashed, unfed, with untreated injuries. They suspect parental drug use. They report it to Child Protective Services. But Child Protective Services is overwhelmed. They have maybe 5 caseworkers for the entire county. There are hundreds of cases. The caseworkers are drowning. Kids are falling through the cracks. By 2018, Millbrook is in complete crisis. the mayor tries to convene a town meeting to address the problem. More than 1,000 people show up. Desperate people, angry people, people whose lives have been destroyed by meth. A woman stands up and talks about her son. He was a normal kid, good grades, played sports. Then at age 16 he tried meth. Just once, just at a party, and he became addicted. He dropped out of school. He started stealing to support his habit. He's now in prison at age 22. Another person talks about his sister. She was a teacher, had a good job, had a family, started taking diet pills, prescription diet pills, became addicted, graduated to street meth, abandoned her family. Now she's homeless. Her kids are being raised by their grandmother. Another person talks about the epidemic of meth mouth. Kids coming into the dental office with teeth literally rotting in their heads. Teenagers with full mouth extractions. The dentist tries to tell them to stop using meth, but they can't stop. The addiction is too powerful. The fire department chief talks about the number of fires, meth labs that explode, fires in abandoned buildings where homeless meth addicts are staying. The fire department is responding to fires constantly, but they're not equipped to handle hazardous chemical scenes. Firefighters are being exposed to the toxic fumes from meth production. Some of them are developing respiratory problems. The town council doesn't know what to do. They propose harsher punishments, more police, more drug busts, but it's not working. The drug keeps flowing in. The supply is endless. Every time they arrest one dealer, another one takes his place. Every time they bust one lab, another one starts up somewhere else. By 2020, Millbrook has experienced a complete social collapse in some neighbourhoods. Certain blocks are basically abandoned. Half the houses are empty. The ones that are occupied are often in states of disrepair. Meth production has destroyed property values. People don't want to invest in a town that's known as a meth town. Businesses don't want to locate there. Young people who can afford to move leave. The ones who stay are either trapped by poverty or trapped by addiction. The crime rate has skyrocketed. Theft is everywhere. People stealing to support their habits. Car thefts. Home invasions. Robbery. The police are responding to call after call, but they're too few and the problem is too big. The schools are becoming daycare centres more than educational institutions. So many kids are dealing with addiction issues at home. Teachers are spending more time dealing with behavioural problems and family crises than actually teaching. Test scores are plummeting. Graduation rates are declining. The pipeline of poverty is being reinforced. Kids who aren't getting educated can't get good jobs. They're stuck in poverty. And poverty is a risk factor for drug use. And the drugs themselves are getting more dangerous. Cartel-produced meth. Meth cut with fentanyl. Fentanyl is an opioid. It's incredibly potent. A dose the size of a grain of salt can kill you. But meth dealers are adding fentanyl to meth to increase its potency, to make it more addictive, to keep people coming back. And suddenly, a drug overdose from meth isn't just a possibility. It's a common way to die. In 2019, a 17-year-old girl named Sarah dies in Millbrook. She's been using meth for about a year. She's addicted. She's tried to quit multiple times. Her parents have tried to get her into treatment, but most treatment centres have long waiting lists. The one treatment program in their region that accepts uninsured patients has a 6-month wait. So Sarah keeps using, and one day she uses a batch that's been cut with fentanyl. She doesn't know. The dealer doesn't really know. Nobody knows exactly how much fentanyl is in the batch. She takes one hit, and within minutes she stops breathing. Her mum finds her on the bathroom floor. She calls 911. The EMTs arrive. They try to revive her. They administer Narcan, a drug that reverses opioid overdose. but they're not sure if it will work on a meth-fentanyl combination. It doesn't. Sarah is pronounced dead at the hospital. Sarah's funeral is packed, hundreds of people. Her parents are destroyed. The town is grieving, and they're all aware that this isn't an isolated incident. Other kids in town are going to die the same way. It's almost inevitable. The addiction is too widespread. The drugs are too dangerous. The help is too limited. Now let me tell you about what meth production looks like, because the manufacturing of methamphetamine is its own horror story. Meth labs exist everywhere, in houses, in apartments, in trailers, in barns, in rented motel rooms. They're usually hidden, usually in places where there's low police presence, rural areas, poor neighborhoods, areas where property owners don't maintain their property or don't care who's living there. Inside a meth lab, there are massive quantities of toxic chemicals, ephedrine or pseudoephedrine, red phosphorus, lithium, anhydrous ammonia, sulfuric acid, toluene, acetone. These aren't just mildly dangerous chemicals. They're explosively dangerous. They're carcinogenic. They're corrosive. They're lethal if inhaled in high concentrations. The people cooking meth are usually not trained chemists. They're addicts themselves, or small-time criminals trying to make money, or motorcycle gang members running an operation. They follow recipes they found online or learned from someone else. But they don't really understand the chemistry. They don't understand why certain steps are important. They don't have safety protocols. They don't have ventilation. They don't have protective equipment, and so accidents happen, explosions. People get burnt. People lose fingers. People lose their entire hands. People inhale toxic fumes and develop respiratory problems. Some people die in explosions, and the neighbours suffer too. The fumes leak out. Children in neighbouring homes are exposed to toxic chemicals. There are documented cases of children developing respiratory problems from living next to meth labs, of children developing neurological problems, of babies being born with defects. The DEA estimates that there are thousands of meth labs operating in the United States at any given time. Thousands. Every single one is a potential disaster waiting to happen. Every single one is poisoning the environment. Every single one is putting people at risk. And the cartels? They've taken meth production to an industrial scale. In Mexico, they operate massive lab facilities, super labs, hidden in buildings in cities like Guadalajara and Mexico City. These labs produce hundreds of kilograms of meth per day. The operation is sophisticated. The chemistry is precise. The supply chain is efficient. The cartel moves the meth across the border, hidden in cars, hidden in trucks, hidden in tunnels, hidden in commercial cargo shipments. The drugs flow into the United States like a river. The supply is essentially unlimited, and the cartels don't care about the human cost. They don't care that their drugs are destroying communities. They don't care that people are dying. They only care about profit. And methamphetamine is incredibly profitable. The cost to produce it is maybe a few $100s per kilogram. The street price is thousands of dollars per kilogram. The markup is enormous. The profit is obscene. So the cartels keep producing. They keep pushing the drugs into American communities. They keep supplying dealers. They keep feeding addiction. Now let's talk about the treatment problem, because treating methamphetamine addiction is incredibly difficult. Unlike heroin addiction, where methadone or buprenorphine can substitute for the drug and reduce cravings, there's no pharmaceutical substitute for methamphetamine. No medication that can replace it. No medication that can satisfy the cravings. So treatment for meth addiction is primarily behavioral. Cognitive behavioral therapy, contingency management, support groups, counseling. These approaches can work, but they require commitment, they require time, they require the addict to be willing to change, and many meth addicts struggle with the psychological components of addiction: depression, anxiety, paranoia, psychosis. These conditions need to be treated alongside the addiction, but many treatment programs aren't equipped to handle dual diagnosis. They don't have the psychiatric expertise, they don't have the medications to treat the underlying mental health conditions. And there's the problem of relapse. The relapse rate for meth addiction is very high. Some studies suggest that 70 to 80% of people trying to recover from meth addiction will relapse at least once. Some will relapse multiple times before achieving long-term recovery. And the reasons for relapse are numerous. The cravings are intense. The post-use depression is severe. Social factors, peer pressure, access to the drug, trauma, poverty, all of these increase the risk of relapse. Treatment programs have waiting lists that are months long. There simply isn't enough treatment capacity to meet the demand. So people who are willing to get help have to wait. And while they're waiting, they keep using, or they try to quit on their own and relapse. And treatment is expensive. Treatment programs can cost thousands of dollars. Insurance might cover some of it, but not everyone has insurance. Not everyone can afford treatment. So many people who want help can't access it. The government has tried to increase funding for meth treatment, but the funding hasn't kept up with the growth of addiction. The treatment system is chronically underfunded, chronically overwhelmed, chronically unable to meet the need. Now let's talk about the rural meth epidemic specifically, because methamphetamine has hit rural America particularly hard. In the 1980s and 1990s, rural America was already struggling. The farm crisis, the decline of rural manufacturing, the loss of rural jobs. Rural communities were economically devastated, and then meth arrived, and it became a way for rural people to make money, cooking meth, dealing meth. In some rural counties, meth production became a significant part of the underground economy. Not the only part, but a significant part. Poor people were making money cooking meth. Dealers were making money selling meth. Criminal networks were expanding, and the addiction followed. Rural people using meth. Young people getting addicted. Communities torn apart. Family businesses destroyed by addiction. Farms seized for use in meth production or because owners couldn't maintain them due to addiction. The rural meth epidemic created strange situations. In some towns, the most visible sign of economic activity is drug dealing. In some towns, the only way to make decent money is to cook or sell meth. A perverse economy where the primary growth industry is drugs. And law enforcement is struggling in rural areas. Police departments are often small, under-resourced, underfunded. A small-town police department might have 3 or 4 officers trying to police a rural county. They can't possibly keep up with the amount of meth production. The DEA has tried to increase enforcement, but they can't be everywhere. And the cartels have learned where law enforcement is present and where it isn't. They locate their superlabs in areas with weak enforcement. They distribute through networks in areas they know they can operate. The federal government has tried to restrict the precursor chemicals, especially pseudoephedrine, which is the main ingredient in many meth production methods. Pseudoephedrine is found in over-the-counter cold medicine, so the government passed laws limiting the amount of pseudoephedrine that people could purchase, limiting pharmacy sales, requiring ID, tracking purchases, and it worked to some extent. It made amateur meth production harder. But it didn't stop the cartels, because the cartels just switched methods. They started using different precursor chemicals. They started importing ephedrine from China. They developed new synthesis methods that don't require pseudoephedrine. So the government's attempt to stop meth production by restricting precursors didn't work. Instead, it just shifted the problem. Now people were importing precursors from other countries. The cartels were adapting. The supply continued. Now let me tell you about meth and violence, because methamphetamine use is strongly associated with violence. The drug itself can cause paranoia, especially with chronic use. Long-term meth users often develop what's called methamphetamine-induced psychosis. They become paranoid. They believe people are plotting against them. They believe they're being followed. They believe they're in danger. And when someone is in a state of paranoid psychosis, violence becomes possible, probable even. They might hurt someone they believe is threatening them. They might hurt family members. They might hurt strangers. The DEA has documented numerous cases of meth-fueled violence, homicides, assaults, domestic violence, child abuse. The connection is strong, and there's the violence inherent in drug distribution, dealers fighting over territory, criminal organizations fighting to control markets, people being killed over drug debts, people being killed because they stepped on the wrong toes in the drug world. In some towns, the murder rate is significantly elevated due to drug-related violence. And most of that violence is related to meth, not always the meth use itself, but the drug trade, the business of selling meth. Now let's talk about what's happening today. In 2024, what is the current state of the methamphetamine epidemic? The answer is grim. It's getting worse. Not better. Worse. Deaths involving methamphetamine have increased dramatically over the past 5 years. The CDC estimates that in 2023, nearly 26,000 Americans died in overdoses involving methamphetamine. That's an increase from about 23,000 in 2022. The trend is upward, and the drugs are more dangerous than ever. Mexican cartels are producing incredibly potent meth. Super potent fentanyl is being mixed in. The combination is unpredictable and deadly, and the treatment crisis hasn't improved. If anything, it's gotten worse. The pandemic disrupted treatment services. The opioid crisis captured most of the policy attention and funding. Methamphetamine was largely ignored. Treatment capacity hasn't grown. Waiting lists have gotten longer. The unmet need is enormous. In rural areas, the crisis is particularly severe. In some rural counties, meth is the dominant issue, the biggest public health crisis, the biggest law enforcement crisis, the biggest social crisis. And there's a generational aspect. Young people who grew up during the meth epidemic, who watched their parents struggle with addiction, who watched their communities destroyed. These young people are aging into adulthood. Some of them are in recovery. Some of them are continuing to struggle with addiction. Some of them are becoming dealers themselves. There's a whole generation that has been shaped by meth, whose childhood was affected by it, whose educational opportunities were limited by it, whose life trajectories were altered by it, and the pandemic has made everything worse. Isolation, economic disruption, job loss, anxiety, depression, all of these increase vulnerability to addiction. And during the pandemic, meth use increased, overdose deaths increased, treatment access decreased, everything got worse. Now you might ask, what can be done? How do we address this crisis? The answer is complicated. There's no silver bullet, no single solution that will fix everything. Treatment capacity needs to expand dramatically. We need more treatment programs, more treatment beds, more trained treatment providers. We need to fund treatment adequately. We need to make treatment affordable or free. We need to reduce waiting times. We need better psychiatric services, because so many meth addicts have underlying mental health issues, depression, anxiety, trauma, PTSD. These need to be treated alongside addiction. We need prevention, education in schools, public awareness campaigns, harm reduction, naloxone distribution, clean needle programs, supervised consumption sites. These aren't solutions, but they can reduce harm. We need to address the supply. But enforcement alone hasn't worked. We need international cooperation. We need to address production in other countries. We need to disrupt supply chains. But the cartels are smart. They adapt. They find new routes, new methods. We need to address the economic factors, the poverty, the unemployment, the lack of economic opportunity, because poverty and economic despair are risk factors for addiction. If young people have jobs, have opportunities, have hope, they're less likely to turn to drugs. We need to address the culture, the way addiction is portrayed, the stigma, the blame, the criminalization. We need to recognize addiction as a disease, not a moral failure. We need to treat addicts with compassion, not condemnation. But none of this is happening fast enough. None of this is happening at the scale needed. The crisis continues to spiral. So where does that leave us? At the end of this story, the story that began in a Japanese laboratory 130 years ago, that was weaponized by Nazi Germany, that spread across the world, that became a plague on communities. The story of methamphetamine is a story about unintended consequences, about how a drug developed for legitimate medical purposes can be misused, weaponized, criminalized, and ultimately escape control entirely. It's a story about how pharmaceutical greed led to massive overprescription, about how regulatory failure allowed dangerous drugs to proliferate, about how criminal organizations exploited demand to create an enormous illegal industry. It's a story about communities destroyed, families torn apart, individuals lost to addiction, children suffering, the social fabric ripped to shreds. And it's a story that's still being written. The methamphetamine crisis isn't over. It's ongoing. It's deepening in many places. It's claiming new victims every day. The pill that was supposed to make soldiers superhuman has instead made addicts subhuman, destroyed their lives, destroyed their families, destroyed their communities. And unless something dramatic changes, unless we fundamentally reshape our approach to addiction, unless we prioritize treatment and prevention, unless we address the root causes, the story will continue, the deaths will continue, the suffering will continue. The history of methamphetamine is a warning about the power of chemicals to reshape society, a warning about good intentions that go wrong, a warning about what happens when we don't learn from history. And it's a warning we're still in the process of learning, or perhaps not learning, because so far we haven't done enough to stop it. We haven't done enough to help people. We haven't done enough to change the trajectory. The drug that was supposed to change the world did change it, just not in the way anyone intended,